Hello and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Morgan. Usually on this channel when I talk about books, they are novels, typically. But today I wanted to recommend something a little bit different because I have been getting into graphic novels this year. I have read a small handful of graphic novels in the past. You know, I've read Persepolis and Fun Home and some of the big ones. But graphic novels aren't a regular part of my reading life, and I think I want to change that. I read 3 graphic novels recently that I really enjoyed the reading experience for. I loved the way that they used imagery to tell the story. I've also been getting into video games lately, so storytelling through imagery and participation. As a reader who has to flip the page and try to make sense of the panels, or as a gamer who has to actually navigate through this story. So I'm very excited about visual storytelling lately, and I wanted to recommend you a few books if you're also interested in this genre of storytelling. Each of these books actually had similar themes. They all deal with loss. They're all set mostly in a domestic setting, the home, and they all have magical realist elements to them, but otherwise they are all completely different. So let's start with my favorite comic artist and writer of what little I have read within this genre, and that would be the Ontarian author and artist Jeff Lemire. I haven't actually read that much from Jeff Lemire, but I'm always so drawn to his art style, and whenever I do read one of his books, I also adore the writing quality in them. And when I was at the library the other day, I was drawn to this spine that said Mazebook, and it kind of had these jelly elements on the cover of the text. I was drawn right away to this spine. Lo and behold, it's Jeff Lemire, of course. Of all of the books in this section of the library, I honed right in on a Jeff Lemire work, so of course I took it out. Mazebook is something that he wrote after he had finished doing a bunch of projects for other people, for Marvel and DC, and Mazebook was kind of a passion project for him. He said that the story for the book just kind of flowed out of him, and that it was a big relief to get to have total freedom and artistic control over this product that he didn't even know who was going to publish it or when. Personally, I really like Lemire's family, community-focused stories that are set in rural Ontario. Although Mazebook is set in downtown Toronto, this story is still about a father and a daughter. The father has lost his daughter to illness. His wife has since moved on. She's found a new man. She's found a way to cope with this, but the father has not found a way to cope with his daughter's death. And when his daughter was alive, she would always wear this red sweater of his. And she really liked maze books. She loved completing mazes. And now that she's passed on, he is convinced that his daughter is trying to reach out to him some way. And she's telling him to find her and to find her at the center of a maze. And so he goes and finds one of her old maze books. He lays that maze over a map of Toronto, putting the entrance of the maze at their house. And the center of the maze lines up with Toronto's Sick Kids Hospital. So that's just a little snippet of the concepts that go into the art style of this book. Not only is it a beautiful story of father-daughter love and a little bit of a detective story or a mystery because he's trying to get to the bottom of these strange phone calls that he's getting from his daughter, but also the way he's using the genre of the comic book is really interesting. I love what he's done with the panels, where in some cases he's actually sort of made a maze with the panels of the comic book. And then one of my favorite things that I've ever seen Jeff Lemire do with art is these big full spread images that are just beautiful artworks in themselves. I also loved this central symbol of the red sweater that is coming apart, because that pop of red throughout the book really gave me something to hold on to, and it felt like I was teasing out this story as well as he was. And there are many instances where that string turns into a maze, turns into wires because he's a construction worker, or tubing, and there's this motif of mazes throughout the imagery in the book as well. Lemire also says at the back of the book that he was inspired by Haruki Murakami's magical realist style in this text, and I can totally see that. There is a talking animal in this book, and kind of like in Kafka on the Shore, I felt like I was following the main character through this mystery, through this real but undiscovered underlayer of the world. That's kind of how Mazebook feels as well. So he did a good job trying to emulate Murakami within a Jeff Lemire style. So that's the first graphic novel I wanted to recommend, is Mazebook by Jeff Lemire. I've already returned that one to the library, but the next one that I read, which I also picked up the same day, is The Sculptor by Scott McCloud. And I grabbed this one because Scott McCloud wrote the book Understanding Comics, which I don't think I've finished, but I've read a good chunk of. If you are an artist or a writer of any kind, then I highly recommend reading this book. It's genius. So of course, I wanted to pick up his actual graphic novel where he tells a story through comics. This tells the story of a man named David, and he is a sculptor living in New York City. Everybody he loves has passed away, and he's kind of down because he had his like 5 minutes of fame and now nobody cares about his art. It's barely selling. He needs a new break in his artistic life, and he has promised himself that he will not leave New York City until he finds success again in his art. And he sticks to his promises. This is a big thing with David. Unfortunately, he can't really cover rent because his art isn't selling, and that is when he gets a visit from his dead Uncle Harry, who is actually Death himself. Good old Uncle Harry says, "Here's the deal, David. Since I am Death, I can offer you an opportunity to become a great sculptor again, but you will die in 200 days. And David is like, sign me up. I don't mind dying as long as it means that I can make sculptures that people are going to see, and then I'll live on through my artwork. The other main character that David meets along the way is a woman named Meg, and Meg is an actor and performance artist. He actually meets her through this large-scale performance art piece on the street that she has performed, and he ends up being the unwitting solo audience member of this piece. There definitely is this juxtaposition between those characters where David desperately wants to be remembered forever and set in stone, and he's a sculptor of stone, whereas Meg is kind of carefree and she works within the ephemeral arts of theater and performance art. And at times these two characters did feel a bit two-dimensional. Meg is constantly having these mental breakdowns that David has to save her from, and David is like constantly depressed because he's not a good artist. He's like a suffering, starving artist, and Meg has to remind him of the beauty in the world, like the manic pixie dream girl that she is. So if you're not into that, then you might not like this book. And yes, it's a story that has been told over and over and over again, but I did think that Scott McCloud brought like a new element to this story because it does deal with the art market and questions of what is art, what is good art, should we be making art that is popular and sells, and why does the art that sells sell? That's an especially interesting question in the form of comics because it is like a low art, I think. It's not high art of the art market. It's being mass marketed for public consumption, whereas David wants to be a part of high art. And the really interesting part is the powers that he is granted to become a great sculptor again before he dies. He basically can manipulate any material very easily, like Play-Doh, into whatever shapes he wants. But he hits up with obstacles that many artists do, and it creates a pretty interesting story. Honestly, I wasn't super immersed in it for the most of the time, and I only gave it a 3 stars, but the ending did redeem a lot of the book for me because it ended very well, and I can appreciate a really good ending. And then the final graphic novel that I want to talk about was originally published as a series of comics. There were like 7 tiny comics that made up this story, but I read it in its like full collected edition, and that is I Killed Giants. This is written by Joe Kelly with art and design by J.M. Ken Nimura, and this is very different. Whereas in the first 2 instances we had middle-aged white men that were main characters, this centers on a 5th grade girl, and this story really does resist stereotypes. None of the characters in here are two-dimensional, especially not the main character, Barbara. Barbara is very weird, and she's not cute weird, she's just weird. Like, unlikable at times weird. She is violent at times, she's clearly struggling, she doesn't like things that normal kids do, she's obsessed with the fact that she kills giants and actually believes that she does, and that she has a warhammer in her pocketbook that she can pull out to defeat the giants, which are surely going to descend on the town at any time. She plays D&D, but not even the people she plays D&D with really like her. The thing that makes Barbara so charming, though, is that she is determined and she is solid in her belief in these giants and her ability to kill them. She's also super funny. For instance, here's a panel where she's talking to her class bully. I can't remember what the exact words are, but I thought it was flipping hilarious. Or here's this other panel which occurs after she literally hits her school therapist. I also laughed out loud at. Really, ultimately, this story is about people trying to understand Barbara and trying to break through to her in various ways. Obviously, the school therapist tries, but also like the principal is struggling to understand her and just wants her to be better. She develops a friend who is desperately trying to understand her and become friends with her. She is being raised by her older sister, who again just like wants her to be a normal child so that she's not struggling to take care of her. And nobody can really seem to reach Barbara's reality through all of her built-up fiction of these giants. And we as the reader are also trying to understand what is happening with Barbara and trying to break through to her, because at the beginning of this book the art style is like pretty abstract, and it took me a while to fully parse out what was actually happening, because we're sort of seeing the world through Barbara's eyes, but it's a pretty skewed image, and so sometimes I really felt lost on the page trying to understand what was happening. For instance, like with these little cartoon fairy things flitting around, I couldn't tell who was talking when or where she was, so it was quite complex. Like, it didn't try to handhold you through this narrative. This book almost had me in tears at the end. The author didn't hold back. The artist didn't try to spoon feed us what was going on in these scenes. Everything in this graphic novel just worked together to tell this heart-wrenching story of a child that is trying to deal with her grief. So those are the 3 graphic novels I wanted to talk about. All of them have magical realist elements. All of them are about loss and grief and how to mourn our loved ones, but they're also very, very different in their own ways. Let me know what you thought of these graphic novels if you've read them already, or feel free to give me more graphic novel recommendations, because I'm sure I'm going to read a lot more this year and my library has a good section of them. Or if you're not into graphic novels yet, maybe this video has encouraged you to pick one up. Maybe one of these 3. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in another video soon.